I'm Joanna Holmes and I'm a consultant social worker with West Midlands Teaching Partnership. I want to welcome you all to this research seminar, which is brought to you by the partnership. We are one of 27 accredited teaching partnerships in the country, and we bring together academics, practitioners, senior leaders and experts to strengthen the quality of social work education, training and practice across the region. We have 27 partners, including HEIs, Children's Trusts, local authorities and NHS trusts. One of the areas we've been working on is improving social workers' access to and understanding of research and supporting them to apply messages from research to their day-to-day practice. One way we hope to do this is by these seminars, and today we're joined by John Glasby from the University of Birmingham, who will be presenting his research on why do people with a learning disability and or autistic people get stuck in hospital and what can we do about it. Before we hear from John, we have Joanne McCormack from NICE, who's going to provide a short introduction to the work of NICE and its link to research. So I'll hand over to you. Over to you, Jo.
That's lovely. Thanks ever so much, Jo. I'm just going to pull up a few slides. Here we go. I've only got less than 5 minutes, so I hope everybody can see that. Lovely. NICE, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, and I'm just taking 5 minutes before this really important research seminar just to really reiterate how important research is to us. NICE is that independent organisation providing that national guidance and advice to improve health and social care across the UK, and it's really about us wanting to put that evidence at the heart of those health and care decision making. We're all about improving that quality, that safety, that equity of care. We want to all ensure those best outcomes for people. And really, we can only say that national guidance, we can only provide that based on the research that's been done and made available. So in our guidance development, we review all the available research on a topic. What we'll be saying is things that we know to be safe, effective, cost-effective practice. We have some consideration of the practicalities of implementing that actually in the system, the extent of uncertainty that there might be in the data and the evidence, and the social values that influence all of that. So NICE reviews all that available evidence. We know what we make recommendations so that we know to be safe, effective and cost-effective practice. There's a voiceover presentation that's slightly longer than this that talks in a little bit more detail about NICE, where to find our guidance and what you're looking for. And that recording is saved on the West Midlands Social Work Teaching Partnership website. And one of the big things that comes with our guidance when we've made that recommendations is where we've highlighted gaps in the evidence. So we want to say something, but the research isn't out there. So we do make some recommendations for research. You can see them attached to every guideline landing page. Some of them do go forward for funding calls and projects, and that enables us to provide that support for your practice. This is just a typical guideline landing page. This one's just from May last year. There's a couple of things just to note on that. So there's a lot of consistency with NICE. All our guidelines look very similar. You've got those recommendations on that left-hand side. You've got recommendations for research where we knew there was a gap in the evidence there. And you have got some tools and resources aligned with that to try and help with the implementation or your evidence-informed practice there. Just on that note, NICE has dedicated social care pages. Within that, there's some scenarios for social work that you might find of interest. And we've worked with the Social Care Institute for Excellence because our guidance can be very large. We've put together just the key points in a quick guide, and there's some dedicated ones there for social workers. So there's quite a lot of resources all on the NICE website, very specific guidance on topics, but we can only do that with the research, and that's me today done. Thank you.
Sorry, I was on mute then. That's great. Thanks, Joe. I'll hand over to yourself, John.
That's great. Thanks ever so much, and hope everyone can hear me okay. My name's John Glasby, and I work at the University of Birmingham in the Department of Social Work and Social Care. I trained as a social worker in Birmingham by background, and as part of my role at the university, I'm the lead of a new UK centre called Impact, which stands for Improving Adult Care Together, and is the UK centre for implementing evidence in adult social care. Today's topic, though, is a slightly different piece of work, a separate study that we've carried out looking at the experiences of people with learning disabilities and or autistic people in long stay hospital settings, and ways in which we could draw on lived experience and practice knowledge to support more people to come out of hospital and lead more ordinary lives. And ahead of a launch of some of our policy and practice materials next month, I was really delighted to have the invitation to be here today to speak and to give you a preview of the findings. So I'll just pause a moment and share my slides. Can I just check that those have come up okay on the screen? If someone could just say yes. I can't see anybody, unfortunately.
Hi,
so
John, if you could put it,
Yeah, that's it.
there
We can see them. Perfect.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, everyone. That's great. So yes, why do people with learning disability and autistic people get stuck in hospital, and what could we do about it? This is a joint project between the University of Birmingham and the rights-based organisation Changing Our Lives, who are based in the West Midlands as well. And we know that many people with learning disabilities and or autistic people spend a lot longer than they should in hospitals in assessment and treatment. I'm sorry. Hi, did someone say something there, or shall I carry on?
I think you can carry on, John.
Okay, sorry, beg your pardon. So we know that people with learning disabilities and or autistic people spend a lot longer than they should in what we've called long stay hospital settings. It might be assessment and treatment units where people have become stuck. It could be learning disability wards in broader mental health hospitals, in particular kind of forensic settings, or sometimes in kind of NHS campuses where there's other provision around them. We've used the phrase long stay settings as a shorthand for some of that. And there are lots of people living in those environments, sometimes for many, many years, and often with no sense of when they may be able to leave. There's about 2,000 people in England at any one time, in spite of more than a decade now of attempts to close the vast majority of those beds and to support those people to leave hospital and to lead more ordinary lives via the Building the Right Support agenda and the Transforming Care agenda as two examples. Some people spend many years, and a number of people out of those 2,000 have been in hospital for 10 years plus. And although we focused on England, these issues are also true in Wales, in Scotland, and in Northern Ireland as well. So people spend a lot longer than they should in hospital. Hospitals aren't often geared up to help people lead an ordinary life. Most people would rather leave hospital and be back in the community, ideally at home, if they had any positive choice. We've also seen a number of really high profile and horrific abuse scandals, often highlighted by the media through Panorama in particular, and others, as well as the stories of individuals and their families that are often told through campaigns or on social media, and increasingly in the mainstream media. And many of these services are incredibly expensive as well. So there's so much money going into them that it's hard to have the money to support people to stay healthy and well in the community in the first place, and then hard to provide the kinds of supports that people need after hospital, because the hospital stay itself consumes so much resource. People are also often out of area and a long way away from family, friends, and communities. So this is a problem for people, but for the health and social care system more generally. Perhaps bizarrely, for a topic that is so high profile and so fundamental, and goes to the heart of health and social care practice to such an extent, there's been relatively little formal research undertaken about these issues in the past. The article that you can see here is a review of the background literature in the UK. It's free to access, so you'd be able to find it online if you're interested in the detail. And it looks at the previous studies that have looked at people who are delayed in long stay hospital settings and some of the factors that might account for that. The vast majority of those studies are bed censuses, effectively working from medical notes or categorising people as to whether they're still right to be in hospital or not. And the vast majority of that previous research doesn't engage with people with learning disabilities, with families, or indeed with frontline staff who provide the support for people and who are often some of the decision makers involved in these processes. It's very quantitative. It's based on audits of medical notes, and it gives you a quick percentage of the number of people in hospital at any given time that needn't be there if there was somewhere else for them to go. Depending on the location, depending on the moment in time, and depending on the methodology that you pick, those studies suggest that somewhere between 11 and 80% of people are delayed in hospital when they don't need to be there anymore, or where they don't need the level of security that's currently being provided in a particular forensic service. And then the solutions that people put forward are basically very, very weak in those studies. Delays that are either to do with the system, or sometimes it's to do with the person and characteristics and complexities associated with the person and particular diagnoses that they may have. And we've really queried the latter, because to me anyway, that feels like we're blaming the victim, to say it's the person's fault that they're stuck in hospital, rather than it's our fault because we haven't found better ways of supporting people, complex though that is. Some of the solutions put forward as well are a little bit flaky, if I can put it like that as well. So someone will say lots of people are delayed in hospital. There'd be fewer delays if we had more community provision. But there's no real attempt to say, well, what would that provision look like? Is that really true? Is there genuinely not enough community provision? What would happen if we provided more community provision and then repeated the study? Would there be fewer people delayed? It's just slightly kind of lazy. There's lots of delays. The solution would be more of these kinds of services, almost as a kind of blanket response. So that literature doesn't get you very far effectively. Some contrast, we wanted to adopt a different approach. We wanted to see, to draw on the lived experience of people with learning disabilities and or autistic people who are in long stay hospital settings. And we wanted to draw on the lived experience of their families. And then in addition, we wanted to draw on the practice knowledge of different health and social care staff who support people, both who support them in terms of sort of frontline direct care, and who are responsible for supporting people as they come out of hospital, or indeed funding and making decisions about people leaving hospital. A much more sort of bottom-up route into these issues, drawing on lived experience and practice knowledge, than perhaps has been the case in the past, where some of the approaches have felt quite top-down and quite policy and managerial in their focus. Just in case colleagues are interested, we did something similar a number of years ago in services for older people, looking at the number of older people who get admitted to general hospitals as emergency patients. And policymakers and the media sometimes describe some of those as inappropriate admissions, in inverted commas, people admitted to hospital because there's nowhere else for them to go, rather than because they really need the services provided there. And we carried out quite a large study called Who Knows Best, where we tried to explore and critique and understand that from the point of view of older people and families, and from the point of view of health and social care staff. And to cut a long story short, we found it's much more complicated than policymakers or the media suggest. And that also we found in that particular study that the older people we spoke to were better at thinking about scope for prevention than the health and social care system, because they were the only people that had a kind of longitudinal sense of what their lives were like over time, how their health had deteriorated, how they'd sought help, what had happened, what they'd found helpful, what had found not very helpful, and so on and so forth. All the different health and social care professions involved in their lives. The vast majority of them had quite episodic contact. They saw the person at a particular moment in time. So just as a classic example, a GP might say, well, Mrs. Smith broke her hip, so she needed to be admitted to hospital. It was an appropriate admission. Mrs. Smith might say, well, that is true. I fell over and broke my hip. I did need to be in hospital. It was an appropriate admission. But actually, I'd had a dodgy piece of carpet between my kitchen and my living room for 6 months that I was worried about. I've been trying to get some help from a local handyperson scheme, and I was on a waiting list for an assessment by a social worker for some more general support. The handyperson was going to come out and fix the carpet and kept cancelling. And after the 4th cancellation, I fell over the dodgy bit of carpet and I broke my hip. So the admission was appropriate. It was right to be in hospital with a broken hip, but actually it was still preventable. And it was the older person who was spotting scope for doing things differently rather than the health and social care system, because the older person and their family were the only people who were experts in their own situations and who had a longitudinal sense of their journey through services. So if you like, the current study was very similar, but focused on discharge from hospital and focused on long stay settings for people with learning disabilities and autistic people, rather than that previous Who Knows Best study that was about older people and about general hospitals. So here we were trying to understand lived experience and practice knowledge, and we were working jointly with the rights-based organisation Changing Our Lives, who do lots of work all around the country trying to support people in long stay hospitals to come out and lead more ordinary lives, and who are experts at working with people with learning disabilities and autistic people in those very complex, sometimes very secure settings. And we worked in 3 case study hospital sites across England, a mix of NHS and independent sector provision, some male wards, some female wards, some services for people with learning disabilities, some services for people who are autistic, some settings where people had mental health problems as well, a mix of forensic and non-forensic wards, and a mix of assessment and treatment units, and more long-term wards. And it also included people who had experience of being in quite long-term seclusion and segregation as well. So we recruited, we were aiming for up to 10 people in each of those 3 sites, and we got 27 in the end. And then for each of those people, we tried to speak to a family member, to a social worker, and then we did a focus group of hospital-based staff. And then we also tried to speak to a commissioner for each of those people, and then to run some more general focus groups for social care providers who often support people when they come out of hospital, and with advocates who support people in long stay settings and beyond. In addition, we observed some multidisciplinary decision-making meetings in the hospital, ward rounds and sort of care planning process kind of meetings and preparations for tribunals and so on. And we also reviewed the case files of the people who took part with their permission, so that we got a sense of people's journey through services over time. I should say that trying to do that kind of research in that kind of setting is incredibly complex. And we were very grateful to our funder, the National Institute for Health and Care Research, for supporting us to do the research in such a detailed, careful way. It's really hard to negotiate access to those kinds of services in research terms. You have to work really hard to make sure that people really understand the nature of the research and are genuinely consenting to take part and understand the implications. People have got very fluctuating circumstances and conditions, so they can want to take part on a particular day and then can go through difficulties, and it can be quite labour intensive, travelling all over different parts of the country trying to work with people when they feel ready to work with you. And then of course you have to do it at the pace of the individual, communicate in a way that works for them, work at a pace that works for them. For some people, doing it really little and often is the best way forwards. You're working with symbols or pictorially, where people don't use speech to communicate. People might be labelled as having behaviour that challenges services. They could be in seclusion at any given time. There's quite a lot of legal complexities, and so on and so forth. And then also colleagues may know this, but they may not. It's if you're not used to it, it's sometimes quite a strange experience being in a very secure setting. You leave your belongings behind in a locker before you go in. You can only take certain items that you've cleared with security in the first place. You go through a kind of airlock system, so the door behind you closes before the door in front of you opens. Some environments have got very low stimulation lighting, which is kind of a bit unusual if you're not used to that kind of environment. In one site, we weren't allowed on site before the relevant staff had done management of aggression, violence and aggression training. We were given a pen to make notes that if you snapped it, it wouldn't be sharp, so that nobody could use it as a weapon. And with one of our case study sites, we record our interviews where people are taking part in a formal interview. And the recording was quite faint, so our transcriber was saying, can you put the recorder closer to the person that you're interviewing? And we weren't able to in this situation because there was a concern that one of our participants had sometimes swallowed batteries previously, so we had to keep the recorder really close to us and work with the security team there as to how we could take a recorder in the first place. So that may be more detail than you need if you're just interested in the general findings. But one of the reasons why there's been such little research before is because it's actually quite difficult to do this kind of research in those kinds of settings in a way that's sensitive to the needs and the communication preferences of the people who are contributing their lived experience. One of the main products from the study will be a policy guide, which we're launching at an event on the 14th of March, and it will go to every health and social care leader in the country, and it identifies 10 top tips based on the experiences of people with learning disabilities and/or autism and their families, and to a certain extent frontline staff, to try and help services think through how do people become stuck in these settings and how can they become unstuck? How can more people leave hospital in a more timely way and lead more ordinary lives in the community? So I was going to focus the rest of the time on the 10 top tips and talk you through those. And then I'd be really happy at the end to answer any questions, to pick up any things that struck you. But also I'd be really interested in the extent to which these 10 top tips resonate with your experiences and indeed the role that you think you can each play in terms of your practice and your organisations in trying to make this guide a reality. The first one was a real sense from people taking part that our lives are on hold while all this is happening, and a plea to health and social care professionals, just do your job, and then please get some oomph. Oomph was a phrase from one of our advisory board members, actually, who said, where is the oomph coming from in this situation? We met people who were stuck for many years in very complex, quite distressing surroundings, a real sense of their lives being on hold while all the necessary practicalities were being worked through. And people felt that it was really difficult to come out of hospital at the best of times, but it was virtually impossible in our current system unless you had somebody or some people who really believed that you could come out and who were really fighting on your behalf to make it a reality, who were providing that kind of oomph, if you like. Sometimes that was a family member, sometimes it was a member of health and social care staff, sometimes it was somebody like a solicitor, but actually almost impossible to come out unless you had someone fighting for you. And then a real sense of some people just needing to do their jobs. If we commit to doing something in a multidisciplinary meeting, please can we do it before the next meeting, rather than the next meeting comes round and nobody's done it and it's still to be actioned and a month has gone past and nothing's happened. Just this real sense of inertia and lives being on hold. And that was really difficult in long stay settings, which are incredibly pressured settings, where there can be real staffing issues, where things have been really difficult with COVID and so on, and where there are all kinds of pressures on managers and on staff and on people living in those environments. So as a researcher, I could email a ward and not get a response for 6 months. I could ring and the phone would constantly ring out. I'd try different people in the organisation to see if I could get to the right kind of people in the right kind of way. And it could take months and months and months to get a response to quite a simple request. Now, that's because those services are under incredible pressure. And when they're under pressure, I'd much rather they were providing support to people within their care rather than answering annoying emails from researchers like me. So it's not a complaint, it was a recognition of how hard it can be to get some stuff done in these kinds of settings and the knock-on effects that there are for people in the meantime. Secondly, there was a plea to see the person behind the labels. People felt that they'd acquired all kinds of different labels throughout their journey through services and often acquired more labels during hospital. Sometimes once they'd acquired a label, it was really difficult to shift it again. You were stuck with it for life. So someone might have thumped somebody 5 years ago and got a label of being violent, and now they were trying to come out of hospital. It was difficult because they had a label of being violent, and they were saying, well, I was violent once 5 years ago. Does that constitute still being violent or having a label of being violent now, or was that an isolated incident once upon a time, and actually I could shed that label? Commissioners spoke about despairing when someone was diagnosed as having a mild learning disability, perhaps a degree slightly autistic, and then having a personality disorder, because a number of services would respond in a particular kind of way to the label. Often the person would say, my needs are the same, irrespective of what label you give me. Could people focus on the needs that I have and how best to meet those needs and whether a particular service can meet those needs, rather than just knowing me through the labels I have on my case file and responding to the label. And also people felt that hospitals were really stressful, anxiety provoking, quite traumatic environments. And it was really easy to become scared, to become frustrated, and to acquire additional labels, sometimes as if you were held to a higher standard of behaviour in hospital than you would be elsewhere. So as a private individual, if someone attacked me or tried to sexually assault me, and I fought them off, and I might use excessive force, I shouldn't use excessive force. But some people would say that was partly in self-defense. If I did that in hospital, there's a danger that I acquire a label of behaviour that challenges services. If I get really frustrated as a private individual trying to change my broadband provider, and I end up shouting at somebody at a call centre, I shouldn't lose my temper and I shouldn't shout and I'm in the wrong. Actually, if you shout at somebody in an aggressive manner in hospital, it gets labelled and interpreted in a particular kind of way, and then it can make your discharge harder. So something about seeing the person behind the labels and working with the person rather than just responding to the labels. And people also seeing the fact that some services respond to the label as often being a reason for saying no. I don't work with somebody with that kind of label. So a way of kind of gatekeeping, if you like. A number of people feeling that they were made to jump through quite a lot of hoops to be able to come out of hospital. You had to prove that you were safe to come out of hospital. And sometimes you were asked to jump through more hoops than people felt was really needed in order to be able to leave. Perhaps particularly where the criminal justice system was involved, more of which in a moment. So one person was told that they couldn't leave until they'd had several successful periods of unescorted leave in the grounds, but they couldn't persuade the Ministry of Justice to give them permission to have unescorted leave. So they said, well, I'm literally stuck. I can't come out until I've had unescorted leave, and I can't get unescorted leave. I don't know what to do to unstick that situation. Someone else was going to a locked and a one-to-one service in the community, but wasn't allowed out until they'd had unescorted leave. And they were saying, why do I need to prove that I'm okay to be unescorted when actually I'm going to a setting where I will be escorted all the time. Couldn't I move to the one-to-one setting in the community and then work up to unescorted leave as a way of proving I'm then ready to move on? Isn't that too high a bar for the nature of the transition that I need to make? Somebody else wasn't allowed out until they'd had unescorted leave in the community because but were being turned down for that because the Ministry of Justice was worried that they might be a risk to other people, and they were at risk of substance misuse. And the person said, well, at the moment I'm allowed out in the hospital grounds where I come across other patients, members of staff, actually members of the public walk through because there's a sort of public area, and so on. In one sense, you know, why am I not deemed to be dangerous to those people I bump into in the hospital grounds, whilst I am deemed to be dangerous to other people in the community? And also, how can I prove that I'm safe in terms of the risk of substance misuse unless you let me give it a go? Sooner or later, you've got to let me try, otherwise I can't ever get out. So this real sense of a sort of catch-22 where you had to prove you were ready, but it was difficult to let people prove that you were ready because there were so many hoops that you needed to jump through, some of which felt excessive to some of the people and the staff involved. A lot of the people in our study had come into hospital via some kind of contact with the criminal justice system. So decision making was often shared between health and social care and different parts of the criminal justice system. And there felt like a real lack of partnership between those different organisations. Typically, health and social care staff would make a decision, but then would have to send it through to the Ministry of Justice for a final decision. They could often wait a long time, they felt, for that, and then they might get a decision that they felt was very arbitrary. So one person wanted to increase the amount of leave that they had per week by half an hour, I think. It went off and it took 6 months to get a decision back, and then the answer was no. And so they felt they were kind of back at square one. Their life was on hold, waiting for this small kind of increase. And they also felt that some of those decisions were based on reports on the person, not on anybody who was actively involved in their care and support or who knew them as people as well. So something about the relationships between health and social care and the criminal justice system to enable smooth joint working and smooth discharges and smooth transitions. There was also something really important about hospital staff and community staff working together. Sometimes, I'm sure lots of hospital staff have got very detailed knowledge of what's available in the community, but sometimes it felt as if people had worked in hospital for a long time, and so their knowledge of what's available and what the community can do might be quite dated. Perhaps when they were training or through a kind of previous case a number of years ago. So a real onus on hospitals to help their staff know and understand what's available in the community and what the community can do in terms of the complexity in which it can work with the kind of needs that it can meet and ways of working. Equally, we can't expect hospital staff to know that unless the community is much better at helping hospitals understand what's possible in the community. Communication is a two-way process. So I think hospital staff have got a duty to find out what the community can do, and the community have got a duty to help hospital staff understand what the community can do and to work together. So that is a two-way process. Next, there was a view that that people often get put into kind of boxes. A lot of the service packages that we saw, although people had very individual and very complex needs, a lot of the responses didn't seem very person-centered. They seemed to draw on the same underlying kind of service models and packages of services, and people with those labels that I mentioned earlier being put into particular kind of boxes based on that label. Equally, and this is our phrase, we sometimes saw examples of what I've called scattergunning, where someone is trying to find a service for somebody after hospital. Perhaps there's been really significant delays, and then they make multiple referrals all at once to multiple agencies, a number of which to us didn't really look very appropriate, and to me were always doomed to failure. But a kind of almost scattergunning in our referral patterns, if you like. If you make enough referrals, hopefully one of them will stick. Now you can see why people under pressure to get people out of hospital and desperate to help people come out of hospital and lead more ordinary lives might become really frustrated, and why one might behave in those kind of manners. But it's probably quite counterproductive to be doing that. Could we focus on the support that that individual needs, and who might be best placed to try and provide some of that, and then work on that in detail, rather than putting people in boxes, or indeed kind of scattergunning to multiple referrals at once, all of whom said no, typically. A number of people and families also talked about how disempowering that feels as well. If you've got very low self-esteem to start off with, if you've been stuck in hospital for years, and if you're really scared about the future, and you get referred through to 10 different providers, all of whom come and meet you and then say no, you interpret that as something wrong with you. You're not good enough for these services to want to have in their service, rather than seeing it as those services aren't good enough to support you as an individual, or aren't right to support you. So a real danger of people kind of internalizing this sense of multiple rejections, not aided by this tendency to scattergun whenever anyone was under pressure. Also massively inefficient, because 10 to 15 agencies come out and assess, when actually, you know, maybe 1 or 2 could come out and assess if they were genuine contenders. This real sense of people saying, you need to give me a chance to try life outside, that catch-22 that I spoke about earlier, and some people feeling that they were denied that either by very risk-averse approaches, and a number of community staff and a number of families and a number of people themselves wanting to see more positive approaches to risk taking, and more of an emphasis on risk sharing, rather than what they saw as some hospitals being very risk averse. We saw one person who'd been in medium secure for many years, and they got stuck there so long that they'd missed the window to get stepped down into low secure, and the time was right, most of the team felt, to discharge them straight into the community. One of the clinical team, though, you know, they were used to a pattern of, you're in medium, you get stepped down to low, then you go to the community. So they were adamant that the person should go to low secure anyway first, because that's what you do, rather than going straight into the community. And the rest of the team were saying, you've had them for years, what are you going to do with them in low secure that you haven't already done with them in medium secure? They can jump straight from medium to the community. They don't need to step down because of the nature of the delays that they've experience. But it was really hard to overcome the kind of reticence and the risk aversion of that individual, who was quite senior as a clinician and as a decision maker. So people feeling that they weren't always given the chance to try life outside, to prove that they were able to manage and could live more independently. A sense from some people as well that the system sometimes says, well, things have been fine for you recently, but that's only because you've been in hospital. If you hadn't have been in hospital, you might not be doing so well. Now that might be true for all I know, but equally the person felt it was a complete catch-22 situation. I'm well enough to leave, but I'm only well enough to leave because I'm in hospital. And if I wasn't in hospital anymore, I might not be well enough any longer. How does something give in that situation to enable me to try life outside? I'm quite literally stuck until someone's prepared to budge a little bit, and until there's a bit of give. The next point was around the trauma that people had experienced. People reading their case files in particular, everybody that we spoke to, or nearly everybody, had experienced, it seemed as if they'd experienced quite significant amounts and forms of trauma at different stages of their lives, either as children or as adults, or as both, either before hospital or in hospital, or both. Bereavements, suspected abuse and neglect, the trauma of the hospital process and of being locked up and having your rights taken away by itself, very complex family situations, etc., etc., etc. Very traumatic experiences. And people were often getting quite small amounts of psychological support in hospital, and many of them spoke really positively about the help that they were getting in that regard, but would like more of it and would like it quicker if there was either more psychology available to have more intensive intervention, or indeed if the trained psychologists that we have in those settings could work with a multidisciplinary team even more than they do already, to embed some of the psychological support into broader life on the ward and into broader care, so that that psychology was embedded throughout someone's time in hospital, rather than it being a session that you do one time a week with a trained psychologist, for example. And a number of people saying, actually, if I'm in an assessment and treatment unit and the only support I'm now getting is one psychology session a week, is the rest of my time in hospital just holding me here for this psychological intervention, and could I have that in other settings if psychology support was organised differently, or indeed, depending on the nature of my situation, could I have more intensive support and then leave hospital sooner, rather than having one of these sessions a week and it taking X amount of time for me to work through that trauma. And more generally, we wondered whether a number of the people that we met would ever be able to lead the kind of lives that they wanted to lead without much more trauma-informed support and practice than I wonder might be available for them in the next stages of their journey. So should everyone working in this kind of way have training and skills in terms of trauma-informed practice, because trauma just seemed to loom so large in the lives of the people that we met. People said, please don't let us fall through the cracks. There were all kinds of disputes going on in multidisciplinary meetings between health and social care, between Area A and Area B, where someone had moved around, between learning disability services and mental health services, between the public sector and the independent sector, between different clinical professions, sometimes between hospital-based teams and community-based teams, between forensic services and non-forensic services, and the diagnoses that people had, moving them in different places in that kind of patchwork of services and support. So a real sense from people that it's easy for us to fall through the cracks and the fault lines in our health and social care services. So as you're trying to help us come out of hospital, please provide a holistic response. Please provide a person-centered response, and don't let us fall through those kind of cracks in services. And again, some of those demarcation disputes about people being passed backwards and forwards. This is a mental health issue. No, it's not. It's a learning disability issue. No, it's not. It's a mental health issue. All stuff that I saw when I was in a community team, when I was training as a social worker, and stuff that, you know, in one sense I would have hoped we'd solved 20 years ago, and you know, we clearly haven't. And then finally, quite a complex 10th top tip about not setting us up to fail. We talked earlier about getting some oomph and being really impatient and passionate about helping people to leave hospital. The other side of that coin, though, is we saw some situations where a senior decision maker, sometimes a commissioner, was felt to have made quite arbitrary decisions, probably because they were quite frustrated. I want this person out by the 1st of April. I'm not prepared to pay for X anymore after June. You know, whatever the kind of decision was. And sometimes it felt as if the frustration and the impatience or other factors in the system were driving the timescales, rather than what would actually work for the individual and that was realistic for the person in their own individual situation. So a risk, some people felt, being set up to fail by having kind of arbitrary deadlines placed upon their discharge when this became a real policy priority. So it's quite a complicated top tip to finish with, if you like. Definitely get some oomph, and don't let there be an excuse for delay or for inertia. Equally, having the courage to work at the pace of the individual and making sure that we don't set people up to fail by through artificial timescales. And some of the people we spoke to had left hospital, it broken down very quickly, and they'd ended up back in hospital again, maybe worse off than they were first time round, and they would rather that the system had taken the time to get it right first time round where that were possible, rather than rushing things. So a kind of get some oomph, but don't set us up to fail. Don't allow delay inertia to be an excuse, but actually maybe more haste, less speed as well, with that 10th top tip. So in terms of next steps, in the middle of March, we publish a policy guide that summarises all of those 10 top tips, and that will be mailed personally to all health and social care leaders in the country. There'll be a free training video for anybody really, but particularly aimed at care staff that may not normally have access to training budgets. That involves us from the research team, it involves some of the policy and practice leads from our advisory board, and some of the people with learning disabilities and autistic people from our reference group as well, sharing their own experiences of long stay hospitals. There'll be accessible versions both of the film and of the policy guide, and then later in the year there'll be the detailed research support. That tends to take a bit longer for the funder to sign off and to work through, so we're able to launch the more practice orientated materials first. And starting in early March in Birmingham at the Icon Gallery, there'll also be a linked exhibition which colleagues might be interested in, and it's this one running from the 7th to the 19th of March at the Icon, working with quite a renowned Birmingham artist, Fokker Wolf, who some people may have come across, who's a really well-known billboard and kind of graffiti artist. We've worked with the Icon and with Fokker to produce this installation at the Icon, which explores the experiences of people with learning disabilities in long stay hospitals and tries to amplify their voices. We've tried to amplify voices through the research and the materials that I've just talked about. Today's session is an attempt to amplify those voices. Actually, the Icon and Fokker are trying to amplify those voices as well through to the general public, and through the kind of networks and the ways of communicating that they have access to, that's perhaps different to the mechanisms that we have as a research team. So that'll be a free exhibition at the Icon, and the Icon will also be taking out 5 billboards across different parts of Birmingham during that period. So the exhibition will spill out from the Icon itself onto those billboards, all on quite busy main roads across different parts of Birmingham, trying to kind of tell these stories in a slightly different, more visual, perhaps more powerful way that you might get if you engage with the full research report, which is written in a particular kind of way for a particular kind of audience. So if colleagues are interested and you're in and about Birmingham at any stage in March, please come and see the exhibition. It's worth looking at the Icon website in advance because it's open some days of the week and not others, the Icon as a whole. But that's just an additional way in which we've been trying to kind of share these messages and to amplify voices that are often seldom heard in terms of some of these debates as well. So I'm going to pause there and stop sharing my screen in a moment. Really happy to answer any questions. I'd be really interested in any thoughts, observations, or kind of immediate responses that you have. If there's time and if it's appropriate, we'd probably pitch these kind of questions back to you. Do some of these 10 top tips reflect what you might have expected? Did anything surprise you? Are there any key gaps? But perhaps more importantly, what can you do to help implement some of those tips and the spirit of them? And what opportunities might there be for you individually or collectively to get these on the agenda locally or indeed regionally through the teaching partnership and other mechanisms? So we may get a chance to talk through those kinds of things today. It may be that there's lots of questions and that we focus on those, and that these are reflective points that you take away from the session and think about afterwards. And then finally, I should just repeat again my thanks to our funder, the National Institute for Health and Care Research, and their Health and Social Care Delivery Research Programme, who've provided the funding for all this research. And obviously the views that I've shared and in all the materials are those of the people who took part and of the research team. They're not necessarily those of the NIHR or indeed the Department of Health and Social Care. I should just say that this kind of research has never really been done before in the UK, and it's incredibly complex and painstaking. So I'm biased because they gave us the funding to do the work, but I think it's to the credit of NIHR that they were prepared to support such a complex study around such fundamental but also incredibly controversial and sensitive issues. So I hope we've done justice to the funding that they gave us, but I also think they deserve credit as a funder for being brave in their commissioning and drawing attention to these kinds of issues as well. So if it's okay, I'll stop sharing my slides at that point. That will mean that I can see people again, and then really happy to hand back to the chair to pick up anything in the chat or to pick up any